Ready. Ready. Ready.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Enlightning. Thank you so much for being here, sharing your time with us. And thank you to Flavio Castelli. Thank you so much for coming and teaching us about Kubewarden today.
Thanks
Tell
for
us
the
about yourself.
opportunity.
Yeah. Tell us about yourself, Flavio.
Yeah, so I work at SUSE, inside of the Renter division. I'm a distinguished engineer over there. I've been working on Linux containers, Kubernetes, and I'm working on Kubewarden more recently. I'm one of the creators, one of the maintainers, and yeah, that's
Creator
it.
and maintainer. That's impressive. And you speak at conferences regularly too, right?
Yes, I've been talking at conferences, let's say worldwide, KubeCon, for example, Container Days, ContainerCon, OpenStack Infra conference, and also some regional ones. So yeah.
Amazing. I'm just starting in that world, and it's a pretty fun world to be a part of. I feel happy every day for my life. We have Simon here. Hello, Simon. Thank you so much for coming. And all y'all who are here, please do say hi in the chat and say where you're from. And so we're just gonna chat a little bit about life before I move back behind the light board. One thing you were telling me during the pre-show is that you're into aquariums, which is fascinating. So tell me, like, what's your home setup? Like, what do you have aquarium-wise in your home?
So I started with I just do freshwater aquariums, so just that's easier to be done.
Okay.
I started with one. It's 120 liters. I don't know how to transpose that to gallons. I'm sorry.
Even if it was gallons, I don't have a good sense of like
Okay.
what that would look. So
It's
I think maybe
like
yeah,
60. Yeah.
Yeah, there we
Something
go.
like that. Yeah.
I need some hands. Hands are gonna be
Yeah.
the only way.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I started with that one. And in the beginning, to keep it simple, I just had some rocks and fish, for example, snails and all of that. But then I got, into plants. So I found now plants more interesting than the fish. Yeah, it's
Wow.
yeah, because to be honest, I was also into bonsai trees before, and so probably I'm a bit into this kind of stuff. So I like
Okay.
to grow the plants
So-
to see how they evolve, and yeah, sure.
So an aquarium is like kind of a high barrier of entry in terms of just like knowledge and equipment. So like what made you think today's the day I'm gonna go buy an aquarium? Like
Actually, it was my daughters.
okay, there
They
you go.
wanted to have fish, some fish. They wanted, And honestly, I was always, looking at them because an old friend of mine, his father had an aquarium with corals, and it was really beautiful, stunning. But it was also really, intense in terms of knowledge and maintenance, and I was a bit afraid of that. So I always
Okay.
postponed that, and then I found a local shop where they kind of guided me. They scared the hell out of me in the beginning because I mean, a lot of people get into that, and then they just abandon the hobby because it requires, a lot of time. Not a lot of time. It requires time, diligence, and all of that. So they explained to me all the ugly parts aside from
Uh-huh.
the nice one, and so I said, okay, let's try to do that. And that's why I started with the simplest one, with just rocks, no plants, because the plants introduce more complexity into the picture.
Uh-huh. And so what's your setup now?
Now I still have this original aquarium, and then
Mm-hmm.
I took another one, a small one, like something like that, which is actually next to me on my desk. And
Oh.
in this one, I just have shrimps and plants.
Will you send me pictures, or if you're comfortable putting them in the public, tweet them, or just send them, DM them to me, and
Yeah, I can do that. Yes.
I would love to see your aquariums and your plants and your shrimps. Is taking care of aquarium plants easier or harder than like house plants? I imagine it depends on the plants.
It depends a lot on the plant, of
Yeah.
course, but probably it's I don't know. It's a bit harder, I guess, because the plant needs light to grow
Uh-huh.
as well as other things. But if you give too much light into an aquarium, then you end up having algae, the green
Ah.
ugly stuff spreading all
Mm-hmm.
around, and you have to do I don't know how the English name to do fertilization. Does it make sense
Okay.
to you? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you have
Mm-hmm.
to add drops to the water,
Uh-huh.
doing right calculations, let's say.
Uh-huh.
While with water, with regular plants, at least what I do is just I toss some product into a into a glass, and I use that. I don't do
Yeah.
complex calculation about how much water is there, and such.
Ah. Yeah. So you know what's amazing? Simon, who's in the chat, is also an
Oh,
aquariums guy.
cool,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks,
Japanese
Simon.
shrimps. Yeah, yeah. I have some caridina out there. Yeah.
Amazing. What a small world. What a fun hobby. Okay, I'll stop picking your brain about that. Let's get down to business. I do have a ton of questions about
Sure.
Kubewarden too. I'm going to drop a link for the Kubewarden docs into the chat. But then while I'm moving to behind the lightboard, you're going to tell us about the Linux Foundation's mentorship program. You said you just had a couple of mentors complete their mentorship within the Kubewarden project. So I'd love to hear
Yes.
more about the mentorship generally, but also about like what particular project your mentors did and like not mentees, I guess, mentees did.
Mentees.
And,
Yes, that's
yeah,
right.
and what benefit it had for their career, if any.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
sure.
going to start moving behind the lightboard while you
Good,
chat about
good.
that. Cool.
So, Kubewarden is a part of CNCF, the CNCF project, and by being part of it, there is the Linux Foundation, who is organizing this mentorship program, which works. I didn't know about it honestly in the beginning, so this is something new I discovered by being part of the Kubewarden project. But it's basically like the Google Summer of Code, which is something that I was more familiar with. So you come up with some projects. You try to recruit some mentees who are interested in taking these challenges, and then you have mentors that are helping these mentees clarify what is the task, and doing weekly reviews with them, weekly meetings. They have I think they developed a quite good relationship. I was not one of the mentors this round. We had two mentees to join us, and there were two maintainers of the Kubewarden project, Victor and Jose, who were the mentors over there. They worked on basically bringing some feature parity between the different between the Go SDK for Kubewarden and the Rust one, which now doesn't make any sense, I guess, to you, because we haven't spoken too much about we haven't spoken about
Yeah.
Kubewarden at all. But hopefully by the end of this talk, this will make more sense. One of the mentees also wrote a nice blog post which summarizes his experience with this mentorship initiative. You can find the write-up inside of the Kubewarden blog. So if you go to the website using the link that was just shared, you can find a link to the blog, and you will see that this is one of the most recent blog posts, if not the latest one, actually. So
Excellent. And is it common for people to be like a college student, or do you get folks from like all walks of life who are just interested in getting involved?
I guess based on the I didn't review all the applications, but based on what I've heard, what I remember, it was mostly college students that were doing that.
Okay.
So I also don't
And
know exactly the rules because this is a topic that was followed closely by Jose and Victor. But if it
uh-huh.
works like the Google Summer of Code, this is something that is actually reserved for students. It's not like
Okay.
someone who has a regular job. So I guess that applies also to the Linux Foundation mentorship program. Actually, because they also got paid, you get paid by the Linux
Oh, nice.
Foundation
That's
if you
wonderful.
reach the objectives of a mentorship program. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
just there is a money, but also there is the knowledge that you build when working with other people. I think it's a really interesting experience both for the mentors and for the mentees. It's
And the connections you build too sound pretty
mhm.
amazing.
Yeah,
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 I think it sounds wonderful. Here we are. We did it. We're back
yeah.
behind the board. Um, so we're doing a whole series on policy. So we've already done episodes about OPA, Open Policy Agents, and Kyverno, and we actually did one last week was Cube Armor too, which is a runtime security.
Yep.
And actually, he is just graduated college, and he got to start. He's a maintainer on the project, and got to start with Google Summer of Code. So we talked about this last week
Oh,
too, which is
nice.
great. I think it's great. So I think where I want to start is still with how I usually start, which is like, what is the problem that Kubewarden is solving? Like, what problems, you're a creator, so I can especially ask you, like, what problems were you seeing that led you to think, you know what, Kubewarden needs to exist?
Yeah,
What?
yeah. So the thing is, as it has already been said in the previous episodes, or generally speaking, security is a challenging topic. Actually, if you look also at the latest CNCF survey, you will see that regardless of the level of experience of a company, they might be just starting their journey into containers, or they might be already used to containers. They have two major challenges. The first one is lack of experience, so training people. These are complex tasks. Kubernetes is complicated, and getting proficient with it takes time. And the other one is
So
security.
when you say training people, just training people on Kubernetes, generally speaking, is what you
Yeah.
mean. Okay.
Yes. Generally speaking, training people to understand how Kubernetes works, how to make good use of it. So best practices, um, anti-patterns, things that you should not do. This takes time. So this is, and finding also people with the right set of skills to hire is not easy. So this is one issue. And then you mix that together with security, which is the other, major complaint, pain point, let's say, of people using Kubernetes, keeping the cluster secure. Because security, generally speaking, is a hard topic, and you put that into a complex environment like Kubernetes, and then of course that becomes even harder. And if you mix the two of them, now you have to train people to use Kubernetes, and also train them to understand the security implications of Kubernetes, and how to avoid certain mistakes that might be harmful for the security of a cluster. But not just security, there are also like compliance aspects and such. And so because of that, the solution, and I think, is to embrace the concept of policy as code, which is something that you have been talking about during this series of yours. So the reason that led me to the creation of Kubewarden was because I wanted to do policy as code with Kubernetes. And so I started looking into what was already existing. And we are a really young project. When Kubewarden was created, Gatekeeper OPA and Gatekeeper were already out since a long time, and Kyverno was already existing too. And so it was honestly it was a tough decision to decide to create something new, because I'm an open source maintainer, open source developer, and I'm always afraid to start something new because it has big implication, and I also prefer to collaborate to something existing. The decision that led me to create Kubewarden was because, and this is being kind of touched to a certain degree with your previous episodes. If you want to use OPA or Gatekeeper, you have to learn how to use Rego. And Rego is not, a traditional programming language by design. So it takes some time to get proficient with it. Maybe not much if you are someone with a flexible mindset, but for other people, that can be like an entry barrier. And to go back on the training topic, there are already so many entry barriers that, this could become just one more obstacle along your journey. Kyverno, on the other end, is way easier. That has also been said during your episode. It's no code. That was the title, So you're already doing a lot of YAML as an administrator of Kubernetes or as a user of Kubernetes. So it feels more natural to you to use that, and that's a big advantage. However, I'm a developer, and when I need to do something that becomes a bit more complicated as opposed to the usual policies that you see around, I got a bit frustrated because with Rego, it took me quite some time to wrap up the mindset. And the thing is, I will go back to that after. And with Kyverno, I said, okay, yes, it's YAML, but the more I look into that, the more I have to learn, how this YAML is structured, with their own special keywords that have in place. So it's kind of, again, learning kind of another language. It's not another language. And then, to be honest, I don't like YAML. I mean, I don't know if you dealt with YAML, but I make a lot of syntax errors, and staring in front of YAML is something that I don't like to do that much. And then I realized that inside of an organization, you already have a lot of people that are doing development, and they have a series of tools that they are familiar with and they're already productive with. And so it would be nice, if we would have a way to allow everybody to pick the right tool to reuse their existing knowledge, so that we are able all together to contribute to new policies. But what is even more important is that we're talking about policy as code, and code evolves over the time, and you have to have different people that are able to understand what the policy is doing, what the code is doing, and this is really important, because I run into scenarios with customers where they don't have the knowledge to write these policies, and so they resort to third-party contractors who do the work, and then they receive back this wall of text that they just have to trust. And if they want to change that over the time, they have to go back to this consultant. And this is kind of slowing down things. Or I run into places where they have a selected team of people who has the knowledge, and they are swamped because they are the ones who have to to review everything, and instead they would prefer the heavy lifting to be done by someone else, and then of course take a last step in review. But the thing is, I said it would be just great if I could just when we write code, we already have a set of tools that we're familiar with, a set of coding guidelines that we're familiar with. We are talking about policies code, and so again it's code, so review processes in place, testing in place, linters that assess the quality of the code. And policies are really dangerous, to be honest, because they are so powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
they are looking into something that is about to happen inside of a cluster. And so you have to be sure about, the policy exactly doing what is meant to be doing. And so I said it would be great to be able to leverage all this knowledge. It would boost the productivity, and it would also allow us to have higher quality when it comes to the end result. And so that's why I said maybe it is possible to do that, and I started experimenting in a way to do that, and it turned out that there was actually a way to do it. And so that's how Kubewarden was created.
Exciting. I have questions. First, I'm going to say hi to Kumar. Thank you for coming again this week, Kumar. So good to see you, friend. Do you think it would be wise to, you've now said policy as code. I think we can infer what you mean by that, but do you think it would be wise to give it a more concrete definition?
Well, yes. So especially because in the context of Kubewarden, you can also write actual programs. So so first of all, Kubewarden is targeting Kubernetes. Its purpose is to do validation, mutation of Kubernetes resources. Sorry, cannot hear you anymore. I don't know if it's a problem on my side, on yours. I think it should be working on my side. Yeah. Still nothing.
I'm talking to you through
Okay, now it works. Now I can hear you.
I'm using the speakers on my computer. For some reason, the browser can't see my earbuds, so I think I need to restart the browser so that I can get my earbuds working again.
Okay.
So I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back.
Okay, we will wait for you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I've seen some questions in the chat, so let's wait for Whitney to be back, and we can address them.
Hello.
Welcome back.
While I solve this problem. But we do have some questions in chat. Did you already talk about them?
No, I was waiting for you. So there is a question. Is this another policy tool for Kubernetes, or am I just mixing things up? No, you're right. So this is a policy tool for Kubernetes, like Gatekeeper or Kyverno. It just has a different take when it comes to writing policies, distributing them, and we will talk about that pretty soon.
So feel simple. We're doing a whole series on policy, and so we did. Well, you were here for most of the stream, so we did OPA Gatekeeper. We've done Kyverno, and those are like cluster-wide. Kyverno is specific to Kubernetes. OPA Gatekeeper can be used across tools, and then now we're talking about Kubewarden, which is a specification. We're about to get into the definition, actually, so maybe a specification for. We're going to learn more about it. I don't want to define it yet. because it's a spoiler, you know. And so, let me go check on. I'm restarting the computer
Yeah,
now.
sure.
This sort of thing's happening more frequently. It hasn't happened in the past like 3 or 4, but I like right before tech check, I've taken to restarting everything. I'll turn off the light board, I'll turn off the laptop, I won't use my headphones, and then 10 minutes before I turn it all on, and that's been working.
That's the demo gods.
Yeah, I guess so.
You should start to do some sacrifices of vegetables, fruit offerings, you know.
Aquarium builder. It's an intense life.
Yeah, Jose is a maintainer too of Kubewarden.
And how are your aquarium skills, Jose? Let me.
You know, I'm a Linux user, so I run Linux on my computer, and there are hiccups many times, but it's reassuring to see that that happens also to other people that are not using Linux.
Get these puppies in my ears.
By the way, you told me that, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Good. Yeah, sure. You told me this is your home, so you have a special room dedicated to this kind of events, you know? Is that correct? Like you have to build it from scratch.
It was. My son is almost 24. He turns 24 tomorrow, and I have a 2-bedroom house, and my second room was going to be an office/room for my son when he comes to visit. And I had no idea I was going to turn one of them into one of my rooms in a lightboard studio. But here we are. Okay, so what's happening? What is happening now? I can hear you through my
Okay.
I'm not echoing for you, right?
No. This is all good for me.
Okay.
The audio quality is great.
Okay.
I assume the same applies to the ones watching the live stream.
Okay. Yes. So it seems like, well, if the audio quality is great, I'm going to.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the problem is. Hi there.
Okay.
That's.
I cannot hear you anymore now. Now I hear something, and there was a bit of. Okay, I will try talking. Okay, I don't hear myself, so.
Sean's here. Sean, it's been a hot minute. Thanks for coming. I'm having technical issues that are related to my earphones. You hear us both. I hear things. I hear small.
Yeah. Your audio quality is not really good, Whitney. You're pretty far away.
Okay, let me have an idea.
That's the beauty of live events.
How's this?
Okay, it's better.
Oh,
yeah.
I have an echo.
You have an echo. Okay, I don't hear myself.
No. We can hear Whitney, but far away. Okay, now this is step 3 where I'm restarting the light board. But I'll put my iPad on so I'm still hanging out with y'all, and then maybe I can let's see this. Whitney's iPad. Add to stream. Hi there. We're gonna remove this, and then I'll look at my face.
Okay, now the quality is good.
So,
okay, good.
I'm going to just like keep you with me. We're gonna write on the board like this and still do things. You can see what I see. That's my
That's behind the curtain. Cool.
Just do it without the visual, and you'll get the visual shortly. And I'm just gonna restart everything. At this point now, I'm going to restart the light board too, but I don't know why that would have to do with my AirPods,
Mm-hmm.
which seem to be the problem. But anyway, we're going to figure this out. I'm just going to, I don't turn it off and on again. So now I'm going to zoom up here. Okay, so my iPad is picking up my sound. I'm going to do a quick restart of the light board. And then we're just going to hang out and do this definition at least. Restart the computer, restart the light board.
And it's really interesting, because the colors that you're using to draw on the light board, they are completely different from how they look into the rendering.
Oh,
That's really fascinating. Are these special markers or just regular ones?
They are, we're getting like this for the full tour.
The neon effect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're dry erase, but they're neon. And it seems like, I think there's like black light being used as on the edges of the light board. We're getting, I like this. We like Whitney behind the curtain.
Yeah, exactly. All your secrets are now exposed.
We're now getting some insight into the magic of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And Kumara's curious about what Linux you're using.
Yeah, I'm using OpenSUSE on my computer. That's what I'm using. I also happen to work at SUSE, but yeah, I like it. I tried different Linux distributions in the past, and I'm just using OpenSUSE Leap. Is this just a regular mirror or is it a two-way mirror?
It's a piece of glass, so it's not a mirror at all.
Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah. It's just
Oh no, it's
like a glass plane. Yeah.
Do you know? I'm starting to host Cloud Native Live because I'm a CNCF ambassador, and I was supposed to host a show yesterday, and everything just completely broke. Like we had to reschedule the episode because we use Restream in the background, and Restream pushed an update that made everything fail, so it just literally didn't work. It wasn't anything we could have ever done. So this is funny. Like it's just like something in the air this week that. But but it's time to do this. It's time to move on and make it work somehow. So let's just at least tell me what Kubewarden is. So last thing I wrote on the board, you can see it even. Policies are powerful and therefore dangerous.
So I guess, the way that the question that someone might have is how does Kubewarden, what makes Kubewarden different than from Gatekeeper, for example, and Kyverno. So there are a bunch of differences. The first one is how policies are being written. So in the context of Kubewarden, you write your policies using traditional programming languages. And also it is interesting because, we wanted to find a way to use a regular programming language, like Go, for example, but we didn't want to pick like a specific language, like, now you have to write policies with Go or with JavaScript, because of course someone, everybody is opinionated about how to code, in terms of programming languages. Or as someone said, we need a DSL, a domain-specific language. But that's also true. It would be great to have all this flexibility. And the good news is that we can do that. So behind the scene, what we are doing is we are using WebAssembly. And WebAssembly is a trendy topic nowadays.
I love this, and I'm very interested in WebAssembly, which I've heard say WASM is the way like people say. But what I want before we dig into how it works is like, what even is it? Like, what is Kubewarden? And then we can talk about how a little more, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So Kubewarden is it's a dynamic admission controller for Kubernetes. It's a dynamic admission controller for Kubernetes, like Gatekeeper and Kyverno. We all built on top of the same foundation of Kubernetes.
What makes an admission controller dynamic as opposed to static?
So you have admission controllers that are built inside of the Kubernetes binaries that are already doing some validation and in some cases even mutations. But the thing is, these are built into the source code of Kubernetes. So if you want to introduce a new check, a new policy, you would have to commit that into the Kubernetes upstream Git repository. And of course, this doesn't scale, And so there is this idea of dynamic admission controllers, which are admission controllers that you can add on top of Kubernetes. So they work by using a webhook server. So you tell Kubernetes, look, whenever there is like a pod that is about to be created, just send a request to this endpoint, to this webhook, and the webhook will reply back with an answer, which could be yes, this is something that looks good to me, the webhook, the policy, or no. And depending on the answer, then the Kubernetes API server is going to say this is rejected and this is the reason, and the reason comes from the policy itself, or no, this is accepted. So this is a validating admission controller. Kubernetes has also the concept of mutating admission controller, which is something that can accept, reject, or accept with some changes. Like for example, you could say by definition, by requirement, we want all the pods to have certain limits. And if a user forgets to add a limit, you can say maybe I write a validation policy which just rejects it. Or maybe I do something more user-friendly, where I say, okay, I'm going to take it, even though you didn't provide any limit, but I will add some default limits that maybe will not work in your case, but at least you will get your workload scheduled. So this is an example of a mutation. And this specific one, for example, is a mutation that is pretty common use case and is even bundled inside of Kubernetes itself. So there is no need to resort to an external admission controller. But just to give you maybe an easier to understand example about mutation.
Give me just a moment. I actually, my diffuse brain's been working on what the problem is, and I think I figured it out.
Good. This really is a one-man show.
It is. Sometimes I feel like an octopus back here. It wasn't my spirit animal before, but it's become my let's see.
Is it fine if I just do some chit chat with you just to make it less awkward, or I can stay silent as you wish? I don't want to put stress on you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, then yeah, totally. Please do. I'm sorry to make it awkward. I didn't.
No.
I didn't think through my steps. I just got so excited. I started.
No, I don't want to distract you.
no.
It's stressful to fix things that are broken in a live fashion. It's like when you have there is an incident and you're there trying to fix it, and there is like the customer watching over your shoulder, and you say, okay, yeah, no pressure.
I really appreciate your understanding and your compassion.
I have a really silly question. Is the music theme of this show composed by you, or because I know you were a musician? Ah, your brother. Okay. No, I can't hear you anymore now.
Hold on.
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Now we can hear me. Look at this. Oh, we
Yo,
did
cool.
It. Okay, now I need to turn off the iPad sound so that's not echoing in the background. We're here. We did it.
Awesome.
Okay. Okay, thank you that was a very silly error. But my AirPods were connecting to my iPad, but I always keep the Bluetooth off on my iPad, so it just wasn't even like I would never turn it on. Like, so I don't know how or why it ever got turned on, but here we are. If anything, this too loud. Okay.
No, I think everything is perfect.
Wonderful. So, what you got? I love it when the CISO and CDPO join the incident room. Yeah.
It is related to, what I said before. You were fixing things with everybody watching you, so really no pressure.
No pressure. But here we are. So where we left off, we're starting to define Kubewarden. And Kubewarden is a dynamic admission controller for Kubernetes. And so by dynamic, you mean it's a Kubernetes add-on. It's not like a built-in one. And we talked about admission controllers a little bit, like in terms of there's validating admission controllers, which can say yes or no, something's allowed in the cluster. Or there's a mutating admission controller, which can possibly change something about an object before it's let in. For example, maybe a company has a policy that you can't go above a certain compute limit. You have to define a compute limit on your running application. And if you haven't done that, it's going to mutate your definition and add that compute limit for you.
Yes.
And so that's where we're at. But I still feel like Kubewarden is a dynamic admission controller for Kubernetes isn't quite as much of a definition. I want like a heftier definition than that. We have code with Sean, did an ASCII emoji, which is of course the way to my heart. Woohoo! Okay. So Kubewarden is a dynamic admission controller for Kubernetes that
allows you to write policies in any language or DSL that you feel familiar with. Are language and DSL kind of the same thing, or should I put both in there? So if you just write, I think it's better to write both, because as someone also pointed out in the chat, with programming language, you think about like C, Go, that kind of stuff. DSL instead is still a language, but is like a specific language that has been designed to solve a specific problem. It is usually limited by design in terms of what it can do to avoid yourself shooting the foot, to avoid having certain type of issues, and so there are different kind of things. Yeah.
Got it. That's great. So actually, without the DSL talking, I've done an episode before on CDKs. Are you familiar with CDKs?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. There's like 200 between Kubernetes add-ons and CNCF projects. There's like 200 of them. So CDKs allows you to write Kubernetes configuration using whatever programming language of your choice. And so you import it. It's a CNCF project too. You import it like a code library, and then you can write your Kubernetes configuration in, say, Python, and then you run a synth command, and then it synthesizes it into YAML that you can apply to your cluster. So this is just giving me a little CDKs vibes, but for policy.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a question.
Yeah, the question is,
yeah,
if it's tough for a Kubernetes operator to write a policy in a programming language rather than using YAML or DSL, that's true. I mean, it depends, and the thing is, the goal of Kubewarden is to make everybody feel comfortable in the process of writing, reviewing policies. So we don't force you to buy into one way of doing things. You don't have, if you go with Kubewarden, you can use a programming language or you can use a DSL. Whatever works for you, we allow both approaches to be used. And while we do that, we try to manage everything. We manage actually everything in the same way. So from the operational point of view, there is no complexity introduced by this freedom. So regardless of how the policy was written, it is always managed in the same way.
I like that. No, like freedom without complexity is kind of amazing. I'm gonna write it down even.
Yep.
That's how inspired I am. Great. So you are starting to talk about WASM with WebAssembly.
Yeah. So if you want, we
heard-
can still talk a bit about the high level. So from the high level, before we go into how to write policies, this is just I would say a regular policy platform for Kubernetes. So you have some custom resource definition that describe the policy that are to be deployed, enforced inside of a cluster. And then you have a controller that is watching these custom resources, and then is taking care of doing all the low-level plumbing with the Kubernetes primitives that we use. So this dynamic admission controller, there are a bunch of primitives that Kubernetes offers, and so we just take all this abstraction away from, we abstract all of that, so we take all the pain of managing that. So, yeah. But if we can talk.
Somehow, so what you're saying, what I understand is somehow you're writing, someone is writing the code comfortably in whatever language or DSL they choose. But ultimately, the final form needs to be a controller, like a custom resource definition and associated controller to be able to make this work. That's the low-level thing that somehow I imagine Kubewarden is going to help convert one to the other. Is that?
So it's kind of correct. Yes, I think the problem is on my side with explaining myself. So. At the end of the day is it's a YAML file that describes which policy has to be deployed. Inside of a YAML file, you reference where to take the policy. It's like specifying where to take a container image, and then the controller is going to take care of deploying this piece of code. From a certain point of view, you can imagine as like a FAS, like a function as a service. For policies, all right? You just tell us, what is the code to be executed, when it has to be executed, which, to be more concrete, is like, this policy should be run when a new pod is created. So this is the event that triggers the execution of this policy. And then the controller does all the plumbing of connecting the things together.
Okay. What do you think? Yeah, the CR controller. Hooks together Kubernetes with the policy.
Yeah. Hooks together the Kubernetes API with a policy. Because it's the API server that, is made aware that there is a new admission controller that has to be interrogated when certain events happen.
Excellent. And we can go over it again here if you want to, but in the Kyverno episode that was, I think, 2 weeks ago, we actually went through the steps that happen when a new request is received by the Kubernetes API server.
Yeah.
So
and it's the same thing. So
yeah. After it's authenticated and authorized, that's when the admission controllers come in. And then admission controllers, as we already discussed, can be validating or mutating.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have a question for you from the chat. Oh, we have hello, Lipom. Thanks for coming. What are the different DSLs that Kubewarden supports?
Yeah, let's talk about that by first explaining what are Kubewarden policies. All right, so we have been kind of moving around this topic of WebAssembly. So this is what will allow us to talk about the DSL that we support.
Love it.
Yeah, so basically, we wanted to have this freedom to use whatever language we wanted, all right? to write the policies and eventually also DSLs. And the solution for that was to use WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a binary format. To make it really easy, you write code using like Go, C#, Rust, Python, Ruby, whatever, and then you compile this code, but you do not compile that targeting like the Linux platform or the Windows platform. There is a new compilation target that is called WebAssembly. And more specifically in our case, we are targeting the WASI target, which is like a POSIX abstraction for WebAssembly. These are a lot of complicated things, buzzwords, that if you're not into that. But to be more specific, WebAssembly is something that started as a way to extend web applications. So it was meant to be used inside of a browser. It's portable. It's designed with security at the center, because this is used by browsers to run some code. So you visit a web page, you download this binary blob, because a WebAssembly module is a binary file, and you run this code on your machine. And as you know, browsers are a big point of infection, and so security has been designed around WebAssembly, and it has many interesting things that made it relevant also outside of the browser. So there is this new trend during the last years, and we've been, I would say, a pioneer in this space, to use WebAssembly outside of the browser. So you're writing your code, and as I said, you're compiling that, and you end up having this binary module that you can run on top of a WebAssembly engine. What is interesting is that you build the code once, all right, and then you can run it everywhere, which means that I can write in the context of Kubewarden, I can write my policy on my Mac, which is using Apple Silicon, so it's ARM architecture, and then I end up having this binary blob that I can run without any change on top of a Linux machine that is running on top of the Intel architecture. So there is, this portability aspect is pretty cool. Because if you, for the ones who have been dealing with, building container images for multiple architectures is really painful. But with WebAssembly, you don't have to do that, because it has this portability aspect. Another interesting.
I just want to. I'm a little bit behind you. I'm still trying to write down
sorry.
But it's okay. What WebAssembly is at all, because this is actually the first time I've ever even hearing a definition of WebAssembly personally. So WebAssembly is a binary file, and first you write your code as usual, but then when you compile it, you create a WASM module that you can run. It used to be in a browser, but where do you run the WASM module?
You run that on any operating system and architecture you run that on a computer, regardless, that can be of a different OS/architecture compared to the one used by the computer that built it.
Okay, nice. So really the whole goal of it is portability. Portability is a benefit, but it's like the benefit, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. There are also other benefits, like from the security point of view. The WebAssembly code is executed inside of a dedicated sandbox. So it has you can imagine that like a container, where when you're running WebAssembly module, it cannot see the processes running on your computer. It cannot interact with other WebAssembly modules. It cannot access the file system of your machine unless you give explicitly access to it. It cannot access the network. So it's really limited. And so from a security point of view, this is really nice.
So because it's encapsulated into that module, you have isolation, which
because when it's executed, so to run it, you need a runtime. To run a WebAssembly module, you need a WebAssembly runtime. And one of the tasks of the WebAssembly runtime is to create a sandbox inside of which the module is executed.
Which provides isolation?
Yes, which provides isolation.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe I will tell you, maybe we can write it down, I don't know. But in our context, for example, we have a component of Kubewarden which is called the policy server, which is where the WebAssembly runtime is located. So this is where the WebAssembly code is run. And this policy server is run inside of a container. So you have first the sandbox, which is provided by the container runtime, inside of which you have a policy server. And then the policy server creates smaller sandboxes for each policy that is loaded. And there is no overhead in terms of speed and security. So you have kind of a Russian doll of sandboxes, which makes things more secure because, again, policies, they're written in our case also with regular programming languages, which means that there could be an attacker who tries to write a policy that escapes from the system and tries to take over, I don't know, credential, whatever. But given that we have this, the sandbox in place, and we also have the container image, which does another kind of sandbox, then, there are different security layers.
So I think it would be fun to draw that out, but also I don't know how much material you have, whether it makes sense to do it in terms of just taking up space on the board, whether it's an important part of the story for you or whether you'd rather save that space for something else.
I would save that space for something else because I would say usually this is an implementation detail that is not relevant to the end user unless you want to know more about the security for but yeah, so
cool, excellent. So Kubewarden policies at the core, we need to know about WebAssembly. So we've learned a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So now what's a Kubewarden policy?
Yeah. So a policy, generally speaking, it does a really simple job. So it receives as input a description of something that is about to happen inside of a cluster. So you have a JSON blob, and then you look into this JSON, and based on some business logic, that is the policy, you have to provide an outcome: accept, reject, mutate. All right. So as input, you get a description of what is about to happen. Yeah.
The input is the rule.
No. The input is like a new pod is going to be created with this specification by this user inside of this namespace. Just an example. And this applies to, all the policy engines. Again, this is the same foundation that we all use. Maybe JSON blob, I use the wrong term, is a JSON document, but yeah, you get the idea of it. It's JSON that has, it has sense. Yeah.
JSON.
Yeah, good.
And then output is yes, no, or mutate?
Yes, it's a yes, no, or that's actually interesting, yeah, because and this is also different compared to other solutions. So when you mutate something, Kubernetes expects back a JSON patch object, which is basically a description of the changes that have to be done to the original document. But crafting this JSON patch object is not really funny, okay? So what we do instead is we just the policy author just returns back the new object in its entirety, and we just do the computation and we return back to Kubernetes just what Kubernetes wants to have. So the output is yes, no, or the new object, the object as it should look like.
Or the mutated object?
The mutated object is a good way to summarize that. And so this is what a policy does. How you do that with Kubewarden is you pick a programming language, all right, and write a code that does that. So we have SDKs So software development kits, that's the abbreviation. So we have SDKs for different programming languages. And we also have what is even more interesting, we have templates. So you can go to the Kubewarden website, the link we have shown to you, and you can go to how to write a policy, and you find a step-by-step instruction on how to write a policy in Go or in Rust. And we have a template. So you basically press a button on GitHub, and you end up having a repository with inside of it a scaffold of a policy. And what you do,
What I'm thinking is I'd like to write down a series of steps with creating a policy with Kubewarden. Does that make sense right now for the story you're telling?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So step one is you either write a policy from scratch with an SDK or you use a policy template.
I would say you use a template. That's I would not start from scratch unless you really want to know how things work on the low side. So you start from a template.
I start with a community template.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which of course is leveraging our SDK inside of it. So it is using the functions that we offer through the SDK.
So start with the community template in your preferred language that leverages the SDK.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And then what you have to do is to go and change. We have a validate function, which is the function that takes as input the JSON, does some computation, and produces an answer, which is the yes, no, or change answer. So you change the validate function.
First, you write your policy, and then you use the Kubewarden validate function.
So you're really writing some code here. So when you have a template, you will find you end up having a Git repository, and inside of this Git repository, inside of one of the source files, you will find a function which is called validate. And this is where, for example, you can write a check that says if label. If there is a label called foo, then reject. Okay, so you go in there and change the code of the validate function to do what you want the policy to be doing.
In the template, change the code of the validate function.
Yeah.
I thought your validating function was validating whether the code you just wrote was valid for, you know what I mean?
No.
Anyway.
No, that's the goal of. That's done by the compiler, which checks that the code you have written is done correctly. This is done by the linter of a programming language that you're using. So if you are a developer, this makes a lot of sense to you because it's just, writing code in the same way as you write your own applications.
So in our story, you've gotten the community template in your preferred language, and then you've changed the validate function to reflect your specific policy.
Exactly.
Excellent.
And what you do next, it could be to extend the unit test of a policy to make sure that the policy is actually working as expected. And what is interesting to point out is that we are just using regular unit testing libraries of the language that you picked. So if you are a Go developer, you don't. It will feel natural to you because you will write a Go unit test. It is exactly like the Go unit test you write for your applications, for your libraries, for your microservices.
Uses common testing libraries, uses
common testing frameworks and tools.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Excellent.
And then what you can do next is if you compile your policy, all right, and so you compile your policy into a WebAssembly module. So we have a make file inside of a project. So you just build the policy using a make command.
So you compile the policy into a WebAssembly module.
Yes.
Cool.
And here you just use a make file that we provide. There is, I think, there is I guess you can already see that there is a big difference with, at least so far, but please, to the people watching, that just hold on. Compared to, Rego or Kyverno, this is pretty developer focused, but we have also things for people that are not developers. If you're a developer, this all makes sense to you. If you're not a developer, you might sound confused and scared. So hold on, don't worry. Okay. And so another thing you can do after that is we provide a tool called KWCTL, which is a CLI tool that can run the policy outside of Kubernetes. So you can use this tool to feed some admission request, so some of JSON that I described above, and figure out, make sure that these work. It's a bit redundant. It's the same thing that the testing framework does, all right? But this can be useful if because KWCTL is also used to do other things. So you could use it to manage the policies, to download them, and to run them. So in this case, we are using it. We could be using it to run the policy because we want to test it, but it could be used inside of a CI/CD system to do some continuous integration. So before we roll out the policy, we run that inside of a CI/CD system, or before we accept, a new policy, a new resource to be defined inside of a Git system, we use a KWCTL tool to run all the policies against this new resource.
So you can use the CWCTL CLI to ensure the policy works as expected, but it can also be used to distribute policy or in CI/CD tools.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the next thing is to try the policy inside of the real cluster, all right? And so I missed a step, honestly, but yeah. So the thing is, the policies, they have some metadata that is attached to it. And this metadata, for example, tells you this is a policy that looks into pods and it is interested about create or update, or this is a policy that looks into ingresses. And so you should make sure that the metadata of a policy is correct, all right? Because then you can use KWCTL KWCTL generate, which is a command, to generate a YAML file of a custom resource that is then used to deploy the policy.
Is that metadata added before or after it's in a WASM module?
After it is a WASM module. So first you compile that, and then you can. Let's leave it like that. I think 5 is fine. 5 is fine. You test it if you want.
I can stick it right, add a metadata.
Okay,
right here
there's no difference when you do that, because there is another comment which is as you wish.
I trust you and your story.
Okay, you can do that afterwards. Yeah, let's leave that as 5, and then we do step 6, which is update the metadata of a policy if you need to update it, because our default policies, they all target pods creation and update. So maybe you're actually doing something that looks into pods. So.
Okay.
All right. And then you run KWCTL annotate, or you run another, and then you annotate the policy. Yeah. which is done through a make file.
And what are we annotate? What are we annotating?
So the interesting thing is the policies, they evolve over the time, all right? So the policy, they do something, they take some configuration settings as input, and with annotate, you basically describe how the policy is used in terms of usage, in terms of what it's targeting. And this information travels then together, it's bundled into the WebAssembly module, which means that if one day if you find that you're running policy version 1.0, you can exactly know what the 1.0 binary of a policy is doing by looking at its metadata, as opposed to figure out where the source code of the policy is, look at the README by looking at the Git history, at the Git tags. So this is all bundled together with the policy. And it also allows us to do some nice things like the scaffolding of the custom resources to deploy the policy in production. But before we do that, we have to put the policy somewhere, because we have this binary file that has to be downloaded by our Kubernetes cluster, and we have to put it somewhere. So what we use to distribute the policies are container registries. So you have to push the policy into a container registry, and you do that with kwctl push.
Is it OCI? Is it an OCI artifact?
Exactly, that's it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So kwctl, by the way, is it has a CLI interface that deliberately mimics the one of Docker. So you have like a Docker pull, you have kwctl pull, Docker run, kwctl run, Docker push, kwctl push, Docker inspect, kwctl inspect. So again, the idea is to lower the barrier again, make sure that they can reuse the same set of knowledge. So you push the policy. Now you have to deploy that, and so you have to write a YAML file of how to deploy the policy. And so to do that, you can use the scaffold command, the kwctl generate command that generates the scaffold for you.
Generates. And when you say generates the scaffold, is it like generating the YAML that will eventually get applied to the cluster?
Yes, it just prints out on the standard output the YAML file. You can change it, or you can pipe it through kubectl and just have that applied. We have two types of custom resources. And you can decide which type of custom resource you want to generate. You can have a policy that is what we call the cluster a cluster policy, which is capable of looking into cluster-wide resources. Like if you want to write a policy that inspects namespaces, this is the type of policy you have to use. Or you can also look into namespace resources and do that instead of all the namespaces of a cluster. So if you want to say, we do not want to allow privileged containers inside of all the namespaces, this is the type of policy you use. These kind of policies, however, they are the most powerful one, because you basically look into any kind of events that could happen, and you could even end up mutating or rejecting things. So if you want to let regular users of a cluster to create policies, you can instead use the admission policy custom resource that we offer, which is a namespace policy. So you end up affecting only the namespace inside of which the policy is deployed.
So we're done creating a policy in Kubewarden, right?
Yeah.
And so now we're talking about some CRs. some policy related custom resources. So let me put a bow on this, and then we'll get into specific CRs. So it sounds like we have a cluster scoped policy CR, and what was that called?
And then we have a namespace one, which is called admission policy. Yeah.
What's the cluster scoped one called?
It's cluster admission policy. Now I'm bad with names, but I guess this is it. I will look at the documentation. I mean, this is embarrassing, but I don't want to give you wrong information.
There's no judgment here. No need to be
cluster
embarrassed.
admission policy. Yeah. My brain isn't melted yet.
So cluster admission policy. That's probably is exactly what it sounds like. Or there's an admission policy.
Exactly, which is the name's admission policy, yeah.
And then are these validating or mutating, or they can be either?
It can be either, yeah. It depends on the policy that you are actually running.
Are there more notable Kubewarden custom resources?
There are others, but I think we shouldn't go too much into that.
Okay.
What I wanted to, there were people before asking what kind of DSL do we support, So now, if you create a policy in this way, this is the way where you're using a traditional programming language, all right? Mm-hmm. And this can be confusing if you're not into writing code. What I want to highlight, however, is that there are times where, for example, this is the best solution. So, for example, let's say that you want to write a policy that makes sure that each pod has a label, and the value of this label must be a version of something, And you want this version to be a SAMVER compatible, semantic versioning, which has certain rules. So it's great to have the ability to use a regular programming language, because I can write a policy written in Go, for example, that is consuming a Go library that has the concept of semantic versioning, and then I use this library to do the actual validation of this value. So, and there are good chances that maybe, I have already written a program that performs a certain type of validation. So I'm already used to, this library, and I trust it, I know it, and I just import it and execute it. So suddenly you're no longer tied to the functions of a DSL, but you have the ability to tap into the ecosystem of a programming language that you picked. So that's one way. But if you want to use something that is more DSL, so what we do also is we allow to use Rego. So Rego by itself can be compiled into WebAssembly. So you write your Rego file, your .rego file, and you can use the OPA command to compile that Rego file into WebAssembly.
Mm-hmm. So this is creating a policy this is the developer focus.
Yes.
And so if you're an ops person and you want to create a policy, you can use Rego.
Rego is one of the options. So yes, you can use Rego. Maybe you already used to Rego. Maybe you already have some Rego policies. So you just copy and paste them. And again, we are in the context of Kubernetes, all right? Mm-hmm. So you take a Gatekeeper policy, for example, or an OPA policy that was written for Kubernetes, and you just compile that one into WebAssembly.
Does that make it easier if you are already using Gatekeeper, to migrate from one to the other?
Yes. So you can imagine this scenario, like I'm an organization and I want to enforce policy as code. All right. Now we can go the way of saying our way to do policy as code is to use this tool. It could be Rigo, it could be Kyverno, and then everybody has to stick with it. And if you're not happy with it, that's it, you know, you have to deal with it. Or you can say, yeah, we go with Kubewarden, and if you want to use Rigo, because you already have Rigo knowledge, you have already Rigo policies, you can use it. But if you want to write a policy that does a semverse check or does some validation of network ranges, you know, IP addresses, CDRs, you know, checks, you can, or if you're just more comfortable using a regular programming language, you can, you know, do that as well.
Kumar says, well, perfect example using Semver. This is where DSL struggles.
Yeah. Yeah,
and also,
exactly. There are so many other examples, but yeah, this is the first that came out of my mind.
And then belatedly said trading to understand Kubernetes hard is the understatement of the decade. So if you're an ops person, you can use what you're like. Maybe what you're comfortable with is Rego, so you're not forced to use a more developer-facing kind of language.
And I don't know if you want to write down, but you know, the thing is, once you compile Rego into WebAssembly, you kind of end up like at step number 4 of your list, and so from there on, you just keep going with step 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it's always the same process, you know. So.
As an ops folk, like I know you said this up top, but will you remind me, like, what other DSLs are there that, like, if you're an ops person,
Let's talk about DSLs. So, what are DSLs? In terms of computer science, you just write some code using a regular programming language that you define a grammar of your DSL, which is, you know, like these are the rules of my small language, all right? And then you write a tool and an interpreter that parses this DSL and does things based on that, all right? So with Kubewarden, what you can do is you can leverage the ability to write a policy in a traditional programming language and write your own DSL if you want to, all right? You could write a Go policy or a Rust policy that takes as a configuration parameter of a policy, it takes the text, the DSL program, and then uses this to parse the JSON input. So that's one way to go, which is a nerd way to go, honestly, because it requires quite some knowledge. Or you can let some other nerds, like the Kubewarden community, do the work for you. And so I can share with you something that is not yet out there. We are going to publish that in the next week. So we have been able to import the Kyverno libraries, the one that deal with the Kyverno DSL, all right? So that we created a Kubewarden policy that takes as input, as a configuration value, it takes a Kyverno policy, the DSL of it. And then when it's been executed, it uses the Kyverno engine to execute this policy. And we also did the very same thing with a cell language. And I know that you're going to have another webinar, another show. Sorry, I'm used to do webinars.
Yes, we call it a webinar. Why not?
Yeah. So CEL is another DSL. CEL stands for Common Evaluation or Expression Language. I'm sorry.
Common Expression Language.
Expression language.
And it's going to be part of the Kubernetes validating and mission policy
episode. Exactly. So CEL is another domain-specific language, which is, I think it's nice. I like the syntax, is really straightforward. and it can be used to do just validation. It's done in that way on purpose. And so the thing is, for us, it's the way that Kubernetes integrated cell was to just use a Go library that is able to understand the cell language and evaluate the cell language. We did the very same thing with Kubewarden policy, because we are just code, So what the way that Kubewarden works, the policies are just plugins of our policy server. In the same way as you can take like photo editing software, video editor software, a browser, and add functionalities through plugins, we do the very same thing with our policy server. It gets new policies as plugins that are delivered as WebAssembly modules.
So you described, Kyverno, like a DSL that takes in a Kyverno policy, and it would output the WebAssembly module? Or
no, so
what?
So we took the Kyverno libraries, all right, and we built a Kubewarden policy that is using these libraries. These libraries are the one that understand the Kyverno syntax and use and evaluate some resource and produce an outcome. And we did like the translation, So Kubewarden expects things to get input. Kubewarden gets input in a way. We translate that to something that Kyverno understands, and then we use the Kyverno libraries to do the evaluation, like it always does, and then we produce an output that is then translated to something that a regular Kubewarden policy does. And so for the end user, this means that he can, use this policy and then feed into this policy the Kyverno DSL, the rules that Kyverno has, and this policy is going to use them. This is all experimental, We are just at the beginning of this journey, but this is something that we always wanted to do, and we were not technically able to do that because of limitation of WebAssembly. But things are evolving fast, and this is something that we have some prototype working. And so to go back, you can use a DSL that is already existing, like we are doing with Rego, like we will be able to do with Kyverno or with Cell, or you can even go on and create your own DSL if you really want to. This is, the kind of flexibility that we have.
So I want to recap. So when we talked about Kubewarden for ops folks, you can use Rego to create policy, which gets compiled into a WASM module. You can add dynamic capabilities with regular programming language if you want to, or you can leverage the ability to write your own DSL. And we, as an example, the Kubewarden community wrote that DSL to integrate Kyverno and Kubewarden.
Yes. Yeah. And on top of that, you can also, and I didn't mention that, you can also reuse existing policies. So once you publish your policy into a container registry, you can publish that on Artifact Hub and then make it discoverable and reusable by other people. We have something like 30 policies already ready to be used. So if you are an ops people and you don't know how to write code or don't want to, there is a lot of repetition, of course, in terms of what kind of checks you want to do. So you can just go over Artifact Hub, find the policy, and just use it. It works a bit in the same way as, I go to the Docker Hub and I find a Redis image to be used.
Yeah, we talked about, in the developer experience side, we talked about starting with a community template. So there's also a way for ops to be able to share their templates too.
Yeah.
And then in the end, I wanted to capture what you said about plugins. Will you restate that?
Yeah. In the end, Kubewarden policies are just plugins that deliver additional checks to Kubernetes.
Are there plugins to the Kubewarden
To the policy
engine?
server, which is a component of Kubewarden. Plugins for the policy server of Kubewarden.
And they deliver additional checks.
Exactly, yeah.
Uh-huh. I have a question.
Yeah.
So one thing we talked about during the Kyverno episode is the policies are custom resources of Kubernetes, just like this, but as such, they have an associated controller so that you could watch to make sure something's staying in the states that you define. Is that something that happens with Kubewarden too?
Yes. So we expose for first. I don't remember. Maybe I'm not going to give you the answer you expect, but so we have an integration with we are leveraging OpenTelemetry to expose metrics. All right. So you can have an overview about how many policies you have inside of your cluster, how many rejections, approvals you are having, and then we are also integrating with Jaeger, for example, or other trace events, so that, for example, you can see that very suddenly a spike of rejections, and you can figure out which policy is causing the rejections, and then you go into Jaeger and look at each individual request that was rejected, and then you can see, like when you're debugging a microservice, if the policy was created like Kubewarden with native Kubewarden policy, you have like all the different steps of evaluation of a policy with the traces that were emitted, and then you can debug things. So and I know that you spoke about policy reports during the Kyverno episode. I don't know if you were asking about policy reports or something similar. But if you are, okay, we are implementing policy reports as well, using the same custom resource that Kyverno uses, which is defined upstream. It's being standardized. Yeah.
So I guess this could go. All this information could go under like a day 2 operations or managing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I just learned that phrase, day 2 operations. I'm feeling it very.
You feel cool because you know it. I have this feeling as well when I learn something new. I feel so proud. Now I have to use it.
Day 2, so like managing policies once they already exist would be the more accessible way to say that, I think. Managing existing policies. Day 2.
Yeah, day 2 operations.
So we talked about integration. Kubewarden integrates with OpenTelemetry.
Well, Kubewarden leverages OpenTelemetry to provide observability.
Okay.
The really nice thing about OpenTelemetry is it gives you an abstraction. So, for example, in terms of metrics, it has an integration with Prometheus, but I guess they might be adding other kind of, they do like a translation, you know, so maybe you're using Prometheus and you're happy with it, but maybe you're using some other system, and so this allows us to do the translation, eventually the end user to do the translation. However, for metrics, we have Prometheus. This becomes more interesting for traces, because traces, you can use Jaeger, for example, to get the traces, or you might be using other solutions out there, and OpenTelemetry can do the translation of the traces into, Jaeger or into this other solution. So this is really flexible. It adapts to you. And again, it's about allowing the operators to use the tools they're already familiar with.
And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Like
exactly.
OpenTelemetry is like the most robust solution we have out there. There's no reason for you to redo that.
Yeah.
Um, and then we restate what's going on with Kubewarden and reports, and even maybe what reports are and
Yeah,
how that's
sure,
different.
sure. So on top of that, we are working on this feature. It's not yet there, but it's going to be one inside of our next release, which is called audit checks. So the idea is to regularly scan the resources that are already inside of your cluster and identify the ones that are no longer compliant with the policies that you have deployed. Because I think this is pretty interesting, you start by, having some policies inside of your cluster, but over the time you add, remove policies, or you run the same policy but with different tuning, different settings. And so something that today is valid, is validated as yes, let's create it. Maybe in a week is no longer valid because there is a new policy or something changed. So
Oh, okay. So it's not just
Yeah.
regularly scanning policies, but it's regularly scanning resources to make sure they're compliant with the policy.
Exactly.
Okay.
It comes up creating this report, the policy report, like Kubernetes does. It's the same format because there is an effort to standardize this policy report format inside of Kubernetes. So we want to leverage all these efforts. And so you have a report that tells you, the operator, look, you have maybe this deployment which is not compliant anymore because this policy says that it's not valid, and that's the message coming from the policy. And so you go on and do some manual remediation about that.
Okay. And so this is to help you identify the problem, but and the remediation is manual.
Yeah, because only a human honestly can understand how to fix something,
Yeah.
And we don't want to bring damage, like removing something, rejecting something out of the box. So
like you said, policies are powerful and therefore
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah. Another thing that we can do is, and it's interesting because you at one point in time you have to start. You want to use policy as code, all right? But you probably already have a Kubernetes cluster out there with resources inside of it, and so how do you deal with that? Or you want to deploy a new policy. You already have policies, but you want to introduce a new one, and you want to be sure that there is no damage caused by this policy. So of course you can do integrate, like I was saying, KWCTL inside of your CI/CD system. But what many people end up doing is they deploy the policy, and we have two deployment modes for a policy. We have an enforce mode called protect, which means that if something is not valid, this is rejected. And then we have a monitor mode, which means that everything is always accepted, all right? But if something would be rejected, then we trace that. And so you start by deploying a policy in monitor mode, and then you use Prometheus, Grafana, Jaeger, kubectl, the policy report. Use that to understand what is the impact of this policy. And when you have fixed all the things that are non-compliant, or when you have tuned the policy accordingly, then you toggle the switch and you go from monitor to protect mode.
All right. Will you repeat what monitor mode is?
Monitor mode is basically like in audit mode.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
So it is, everything is always accepted, but we leave a trail to identify what is not compliant.
I have to look at the edge of the boards. Okay, stuff. All right, and then there's...
And then we have the protect mode, which is when the policy is actually enforced. So it if something has to be rejected, it is rejected, period. Also interesting, in monitor mode, things are not mutated, if I'm not mistaken. But I would have to double check that inside of the docs.
I just won't write it on the board because it never even occurred to me to think about that. Protect mode, policy is enforced.
Exactly.
All right. Cool. Do you consider that part of day 2 operations?
No, this is not really part of day 2. Yeah, this is even before, but yeah.
All right. Excellent. So, as the visionary, the person designing this, what's important to know about Kubewarden, how do you want to spend this last bit of space? What do you think is important still to cover?
I don't know, maybe the fact that
we have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh my God.
Kumar asked a question a while ago. Is there a reference for other examples where DSL is not a good fit?
Yeah, sure. And that allows me also to talk a bit about another thing I wanted to bring up. So, for example, let's say that you want to have only trusted images to be deployed inside of your cluster. All right. So one way to do that, the naive way one day was to say by many companies, we do not allow images coming from this certain registry or this special repository. And so you want to write maybe a policy that says, I don't take images coming from the Docker hub / something or from this registry / something. So you might be tempted to use DSL or use a regular expression, for example, to deal with that. But like in this case, the OCI specification for image naming is really complicated, you know, and it's really hard to get it done right. There are many corner cases. Maybe you will never run into them, but there are corner cases. So a better approach over there would be to leverage a library, like a Go library or a Rust library or any other kind of library where there is all this complexity already dealt with, and just use that. So this is one example, all right? But another example would be, again, I want to have only trusted images. So the approach right now, the trend, and I've already spoken about that, is to use something like SIGSTOR. So I want to sign my images and then, you know, go on and verify that. So what we offer also is we integrate a set of functionalities, APIs that are bundled by the policy server, like the ability to do a verification of a container image using SIGSTOR. And all of that is exposed to the policy author. And so you might want to come up with your own. So to be honest, we offer a ready-to-use policy for doing verification using SIGSTOR, but this works in a specific way. Maybe inside of your company you have different kind of rules. For example, you would like to have the image signed by 3 out of 4 people that must come from a specific, you know, part of the organization. You might have really crazy criteria, or you might want to combine that with other things. And so doing that with the DSL maybe is not allowed because the DSL is not flexible enough for you to do that, while doing that with a traditional programming language becomes, you know, easier.
So I'm writing more flexible You opened a can of worms that I thought might be interesting, so I wrote it on the board, but we can always erase it. Like, so you mentioned that Kubewarden can integrate with other tools, and we kind of talked about that in terms of open telemetry, Prometheus, Jaeger. We don't have to mention it in addition to SigStore. Are there other noteworthy ones? Should we keep going down this path, or do you want to save it for something else?
No, we can also go on this path. So it's I mean, it's in the same way as, for example, with Rego, you start to add they have a concept of built-in. So they add this is an API, an object that you can use to deal with JWT tokens, for example. We can do the very same thing with Kubewarden. We are doing that. So we offer APIs to deal with, for example, there was a user who wanted to do DNS lookup because they wanted to write a policy for ingress objects, and they wanted the ingress object to be created only if the FQDN of this resource was resolvable by a DNS server, to avoid typos and such. And so we added this functionality, and then suddenly you can use that when writing a policy in Go and writing a policy in Rust. And this goes back to the chit chat we had at the beginning. The mentorship program from the Linux Foundation was about bringing feature parity, exposing all this functionality across the different languages. Let me close the window because there are dogs of my neighbors that are pretty noisy.
I feel FQDN is fully qualified domain.
File domain name, yeah.
Yeah.
Or you want to do verification of certificates, for example. There are complex cases, complex operations where DSL is not enough. Someone is using specifying a certificate inside of an ingress definition. I want to be sure that this certificate is coming from a certain requirements, a certain really low level things. The certificates are hard.
Certificate. That's another understatement. Kubernetes is hard. Certificates are hard. Is that an integration with Cert Manager specifically, or is that just something?
No, it's not an integration with Cert Manager. It's you want the ability to. You could just you could write a policy that brings in a library from the, let's say, Rust ecosystem, a library that parses certificates, and then you can start to look into the different fields of this certificate and then take decision based on that. This is an option. Yes, you could, for example, write something that a policy that looks into secrets that hold a certificate and do some additional checks. I don't know. This is
Okay.
And just coming up with that, So the thing is, there are so many checks that you might want to write. The majority. So to be honest, also to be utterly honest. So if you write a policy with a regular programming language, you will end up having something that is more verbose as opposed to use a DSL. This is fine if you want to just use a programming language because you're familiar with it, because you want to leverage the libraries that you use, the testing framework that you use, the CI/CD pipeline that you already have to build the policy. But there are other cases I want to make sure that a label is always there, where a DSL is going to accomplish that with just fewer lines of code. Then maybe this code is going to be hard to understand by someone who is not familiar with the DSL, but this is an entirely different problem. But the thing is, with Kubernetes, you can pick up the best tool to accomplish a certain job, and
Excellent. All right, now I have this much room left. I think introducing a new concept is great if that's what you want, but also I think we've talked a lot about a lot of different benefits kind of all over the place. So I also think it would make sense to summarize all the benefits in one spot.
Yeah.
But I think it's up to you whether you want to use
No,
this
no,
for
no, no, no,
random
no.
fun
Let's
stuff.
do that. Let's do that. So,
Okay.
the title of this episode is the Universal Policy Framework. So, there is this concept of being able to write express policies in any way you want to. All right. So there is the flexibility of writing policies. And then there is, the fact that you have a single platform that deals with policies. So the thing is, you don't have to force everybody to use a single policy platform, or you don't have to force the operation people to deploy two different stacks. You can do that. You can deploy two different stacks so that you have people who like to write with Rego happy. You have people who want to write with Kyverno happy. So you have just one single platform to operate with the same process, the same tools. And maybe another nice summary point would be that the goal is to reuse your knowledge, be it the knowledge that you have as a developer, or be it the knowledge that you have as an operator, which means keep using the tools and the processes you're already familiar with. No need to introduce any new thing, well, except for Kubewarden, of course.
So that kind of is like two things for me. One is like reusing and sharing the policies themselves, and then also being able to reuse knowledge that you already have about a particular language, for example. So I'm going to say reuse coding knowledge. And then share and distribute policies.
Yes. Distribute and slash reuse, I don't know, existing policies.
Excellent.
And then there is the, on the operation side of things, there is the reuse of already existing infrastructure and processes, and I'm referring to, container registries, Prometheus, Grafana, OpenTelemetry, it's not just, what I like to imagine is that, is policy as code. So usually the code that we deal with in production are the application or the databases and all these services that we run, and we are used to deal with them using certain playbooks, certain tools, and we can do the very same thing also with the code that is with the policy as code.
So reuse existing ops tools and processes. So that could be OCI registries, CI/CD tools, telemetry, Stink Store, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And more. Okay.
Yep. There is, a whole universe of things that you end up reusing when writing a policy as code, because one thing that is really, I think, interesting is that when writing policies code, you're writing code and you have to agree inside of the team on how this code has to be written, what are the best practices, what are the coding conventions, what are the linters to use. And if you're just sticking with this, it takes time, honestly, to agree about how to do that. There are high chances that you have already agreements in place on how to write good Go code, for example. And so you just reuse all these code practices, best practices, all these linters that you have, also when dealing with policies.
So that next to reuse coding knowledge, very, very small. I wrote languages, libraries, linters, etc.
Yes, good. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then what benefits does the WebAssembly piece add?
It's what allows us to be flexible, because
Okay, it's at the core
you
of the
know, for
flexibility.
yes, it is what allows us to have this plugin system, that is
Mm-hmm.
that is portable, that is secure, and yeah.
Mm. Underscored by WASM.
Yep.
Underpinned. Cool. Policy is so complex. So this is fascinating approach. And I like how it acknowledges and accounts for all the different complexities in writing a policy and all the different things you might want to write a policy about, but in a way that seems accessible. It's cool. Do you feel like we should add any more benefits?
No, I don't think so. I can't. For me, it has been fun to build it. So that's one of the benefits.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I got to play with this technology.
and how's the adoption for Kubewarden? Like, do you feel like you have a large community of users yet? Do you feel like it's still on the upswing?
It's not a big community so far, unfortunately. So
Okay.
I hope that we bring more awareness among the people about Kubewarden, and we start to see more adoption also because of that. The interesting thing is, from time to we have people reaching out asking, I want to write this policy doing that, and they ask some questions, but yeah, we should follow up more with them and learn more about how many other policies do you have, and why don't you publish? We are starting to do that. Why don't you publish that on Artifact Hub? There is this tendency of people to write policies and then not reshare them. I don't know why.
It could. I do wonder sometimes, like sharing is very fun, but it takes a certain kind of mindset to appreciate all the value in participating in community and being a big part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people approach it all from more of a scarcity mindset, and like they want to save what they make for themselves, which is sad.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
That's when people don't share, I kind of think maybe that's why, because they don't know how fun it is to be in a community yet. But hopefully someday they'll figure it out. So if y'all in the chat have any more questions, please do ask them. I'm going to start doing a recap of everything we've talked about. Flavio, if you feel like we're ready.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
You feel ready? Cool. I could probably spit like one sentence and more in. We'll wait. We'll do the recap and see if it's needed. But you can be thinking of, if you want to write one more sentence down here, maybe if it's just the web page or something. Okay, so long time ago in a galaxy far away, before Kubewarden existed, which Kubewarden must be pretty new if it's underpinned by WASM, because WASM is pretty new. Yeah. When did you create Kubewarden?
I think it was 2 years ago.
2 years.
2 years and something. Yeah.
Cool. So a problem across the industry, not just specific to policy, is that training people to use Kubernetes is hard, and security is hard, and avoiding mistakes in both of these areas at once is even compounded difficulty. So we do have some great policy tools that existed already. OPA is one, Open Policy Agent, and specifically OPA Gatekeeper is meant for Kubernetes. And then there's also Kyverno. But OPA is hard because you have to know the OPA specific policy language called Rego if you want to be able to use OPA. And Kyverno's cool, but you definitely have to use YAML if you use Kyverno, and they do have their like policy specific syntax. So both of those solutions require folks that use them to need to learn new things. And you already, if you're having your developers write policy, especially, they already are experts in whatever their particular language is. And so wouldn't it be great if there was a way for them to use the knowledge that they already have to write policy? So we also just said policies are powerful and therefore dangerous. So not only are we just trying to lower the cognitive load for developers, but also you're creating a safer environment and a way for them to be more eloquent, I'm sure, with what they're writing, more just smarter. So
Yeah.
Kubewarden, what it is a dynamic admission controller for Kubernetes that allows you to write policies in any language or DSL that you're familiar with. So DSL stands for domain specific language, and then by dynamic admission controller, we mean that it's an add-on to Kubernetes, which already does have built-in admission controllers. Yeah. I didn't write this down anywhere, but there are two types of admission controllers. They're validating admission controllers that are giving a yes or no answer about whether this resource is allowed to be created. It happens as part of the resource creation process. There's also mutating admission controllers, which might change a resource before it gets applied to a cluster. So the example I like for that is maybe a company says that every resource must have a CPU limit defined. And if the resource doesn't have one defined, instead of failing the resource and saying you're not allowed to be created, instead that CPU limit is just added into the pod definition, and still it gets created. So what the goal is here is freedom without complexity. And we're talking about, like, wouldn't it be great if your developers could write code in a language they're familiar with? What's even better is if developers from different teams using different languages could each use a language that they're familiar with. So you have policies, some policies written in Go, some are written in Python, some are written in DSL, but they can all be managed and applied in the same way. And that's part of what makes Kubewarden cool, is that it can enable that. So I asked about if the policies, when they're written in these other languages, if they're eventually converted into YAML. And the answer is no. What the YAML is going to point at where the policy is defined as a WASM module. So what the Kubernetes element does, what that YAML file, that custom resource does, is it hooks together the Kubernetes API with the policy that's running as a WebAssembly module. So in talking about WASM, this is the first time we're touching WebAssembly as part of Enlightning, and therefore, although I've heard about it peripherally, the first time I've ever really had to think of a definition or really truly had to understand what it is. So what is WebAssembly? It's a binary file. So first you write your code as usual, but then instead of the compiling part being specific to whatever language it is and wherever target environment it's going to be in, you compile the code into a WASM module. And then that WASM module is very portable. You can run it on any OS or any system architecture. And besides being portable, it's also secure, because it's executed in a WASM sandbox that has isolation from other things that are also happening in the system. So that's WebAssembly. So a Kubewarden policy, when it's being created, what the input is JSON. It's an action. So an example would be like X user and X namespace wants to create a pod. And then Kubewarden's going to then output either a yes or a no in terms of a validating, if you've written a validating admission controller, a policy. or the mutated object in the case of a mutating admission controller policy. So those are the three possible outputs. So we talked about creating a policy in Kubewarden if you're a developer. So if you're an ops person listening right now, it's okay if you don't understand this. There's a whole different a set of rules for if you want to do it in a way that makes you comfortable as an ops person. But as a developer, if you're creating a policy with Kubewarden, you would start by using a community template in your preferred language, which leverages the Kubewarden SDK. But you almost certainly wouldn't start from scratch. You start from a template. So in the template, you change the validate function to represent your specific policy that you're creating. And then you can extend it with unit tests of the policy to make sure it works as you expect. And what's cool is you can use the unit test framework that you already use for when you write your application code. And so you can use the same frameworks and tools that you're comfortable with. So really everything involved in your development software environments and kit can be used now to write policy, which is powerful. So once you've done that, you compile the policy into the WASM module, and you use that by using a Kubewarden provided makefile. And then we start getting into the CWCTL tool. How do you?
It's really an ugly name, I have to admit. We call it KWCTL, or if you're more KW Cattle, that's fine as well.
So you use the KW Cuddle CLI tool as a developer you can ensure the policy works as expected with that tool too. So you can use that tool to distribute policy also, or you can use it in CI/CD tools. So if needed, you can update your policy metadata, and then you run the KWCTL annotates to annotate the policy. So in that way, you describe what this policy is meant to do and how it should be used in human readable form. So then you have instructions on how to use the policy wrapped into the policy itself. So you shouldn't have that knowledge in some other website and some other run book somewhere else where you have to go look it up. Like, it's there with the policy. And then you would push that policy to a registry with the KWCTL push command. And all of these OCI related things are meant to mirror the Docker experience of using the Docker CLI. So if you're used to creating container images and pushing them and updating them and PS and all the things, the Docker things can be done with the CWCTL command. So, but the policy is an OCI compliant artifact. And then the KWCTL generates command will generate the Kubernetes YAML file. And then again, that references the WASM module. And then we talked about Kubewarden custom resources. So the cluster admission policy or admission policy, depending on whether you want a cluster scoped or a namespace scoped custom resource. And then we talked a little bit about Kubewarden for ops folks. So with ops, if you're an ops person, if you're familiar with Rego already, you can use it to create policy. It still will get compiled into a WASM just like everything else. It can add dynamic capabilities with your regular programming language, because a lot of times this is going to be more flexible than trying to use a DSL. So you still can do that. And then you can also write your own DSL. So an example you gave of that is Kubewarden community writing a DSL to integrate Kyverno and Kubewarden together. Mm-hmm. So you can also, as an ops person or you can reuse existing policies. So policies can be published on Artifact Hub, and then they're shareable and discoverable. But in the end, Kubewarden policies are plugins to the Kubewarden policy server that deliver additional checks. So we talked about what they are, we talked about how to create them, and now we went into like day 2 operations, so managing policies that already exist. So you can use, so Kubewarden leverages OpenTelemetry to provide observability. So we talked about Prometheus and Jaeger. So ops folks, again, are using tools that they're familiar with. And then Kubewarden's also working on a feature called audit checks to regularly scan resources in the cluster to ensure that your the objects in your cluster, the resources in your cluster are always compliant with the most current policy. And then that requires manual remediation because it's a dangerous thing to do automatically. You could break stuff too easily. Policies are powerful and therefore dangerous. When you deploy a policy, again, policies are powerful and therefore dangerous. You likely want to apply it in monitor mode first and watch that policy before you actually apply it to your production cluster. So when you deploy a policy in monitor mode, then it's an audit mode. Everything's accepted, even something that might fail. It won't fail. It'll get accepted, but then it leaves a trail so you can identify the stuff that's going to be not compliant and understand why it's not compliant. So you can learn what's happening that way. And then once you're ready, then you can deploy that policy in protect mode, where the policy will be enforced and resources will fail if they don't comply. Kubewarden, one thing that's cool is that it integrates with other tools. So for example, you can verify your images with SigStore. Like we mentioned, you can add observability with OpenTelemetry. We talked about using a DNS lookup to verify that something has a fully qualified domain name before an ingress object could get accepted into your cluster. Perhaps a certificate parsing tool that might be specific to Python, or something like a Python tool to verify certificates. And of course, much more, infinitely more, if we're getting into tools that work specifically with languages. And then we have the benefits of Kubewarden. So we have the flexibility of writing policies however folks like. You can reuse your coding knowledge as a developer. So you could reuse languages. You use knowledge you already have about languages, about libraries, about linters, all of the coding things. As an op, you can share and distribute and reuse policies. And we talked about that in reference to like a developer sharing a template, and in reference to like a fully written policy by an ops person getting shared to our development hub. You can reuse it as an ops person. You can reuse your existing tools and processes there, like OCI compliant registries. It's compatible with CI/CD tools. It's compatible with OTel, OpenTelemetry, and SigStore. And then overall, it's a secure, portable plugin system that's underpinned by WASM.
Yes.
How's that feel?
That feels really good. Congratulations for, it's really nice to understand it. I mean, I went in different directions, unfortunately, at points, but you were able to summarize everything in a really neat way. So kudos.
You're happy? Is there anything you want to add?
There's one thing I realized when you were talking that I forgot to mention. The policies, they are these WebAssembly modules that are pushed into container registries. And so you can use a SigStore to sign them, so that when you are using them, you can say, yes, I am going to reuse this policy, but I trust only this policy author, for example.
So it would be more accurate to say policies with SigStore than images. Well, you can do both, probably.
You can do both, really, yeah. So as a policy author, you can use SigStore to verify images, but as an operator, you can also use SigStore to verify the policies, so that when you pull down a policy or when you deploy a policy in production, given that policies are dangerous, you can say, I want to only run policies that I vetted, and I vetted it, I signed them with my SigStore key, and so I can be sure that no bad policies end up in production.
So they can be signed and verified.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing where my face should go because I know it's the end.
I'm sorry.
So it's okay. It's worth it. It's worth it to impart the knowledge. So that we'll put that under the list of Kubewarden for ops folks. And we have some comments going on. Testing out of cluster, tooling of the DSL, using the DSL for features outside of its domain, Normally, people start using DSLs, are happy, and then they want to do something and hit a wall. So is Victor here mentioning more benefits, do you think?
Yeah. I think Victor is also one of our maintainers, by the way.
Okay.
And so,
Hi, Victor. Thanks for being here.
yeah, thanks, Victor, for pointing it out. So I guess it goes back to the question that we had before, what are there other examples about when to not use a DSL? The thing is, there is this
Okay.
this path most of the times where at one point you hit a wall, as Victor said, and the DSL suddenly is no longer enough for you. So when you reach this point, you have two possibilities. You can convince the authors and maintainers of the DSL to enrich the DSL with functionality you need, and maybe this is doable. Maybe this is not even doable technically speaking. Maybe they don't want to for other reasons, but maybe the thing you're asking is not doable. So with Kubewarden, instead, you can say, okay, now at this point, I hit the wall, and for this specific thing, I will just write a traditional policy with Go, Rust, whatever, and just get over the obstacle by using a traditional approach.
Yes. Yes. Back to the flexibility of other languages. And then Varun's here. Hello, Varun. Welcome. I'm glad you commented today. Varun says, hello, folks. Hand waving, I guess, tuned in right at the end. I'll have to catch the episode later. Absolutely, please do. But I love, one thing I like about the recap is if you don't have time to watch the whole episode, it can be a long episode. You can find where the recap starts.
That's true.
Yeah, get the best of it in 10 minutes or so. Well, this has been an absolute joy and a pleasure. Thank you so much, Flavio, for sharing your time and your expertise today.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. I don't know if you've watched, my pleasure, this to the bitter ends, but what we do at the end is replay the intro music, which, as we mentioned, was written by my brother, and we're going to dance it out and say goodbye. Yeah. You ready for that?
You didn't mention that when you asked me if I wanted to do that. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah. I'm afraid people will say no if I tell them. Not really. I don't want to trick you. Yeah. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.